Hello and welcome to Storied Arcs in the third volume of Grass Kings. My name is Mike.
My name's Alex.
And today we are going to talk about the final volume of Grass Kings. And with our first story arc, which was Paper Girls, I believe we started off by saying that they stuck the landing. In Grass Kings, I think you have to say they stuck a landing, or they stuck several landings. But we're going to start by discussing how well did they do it? It's not the clear, satisfying ending that I got from Paper Girls.
No. And you know, to be fair, that kind of ending in comics, or in really any kind of storytelling, is incredibly rare. To hit a note that's satisfying to both, I would say, the characters in the story and the people reading the story. You know, here with Grass Kings, they're juggling a lot of plates in terms of what the story maybe could have been, or in directions that could have gone. So when you get to the end, it's kind of almost impossible to think that you're gonna land every single one of those. You know?
Yeah, and I think there is a community that is mostly in like the fantasy, sci-fi, and just inherently by the nature of that, comic readers that want everything to be a tightly bundled experience like this. But this is like watching an indie movie where it's about creating an experience.
Yeah.
It's about setting the table with rich, multifaceted environment, and they've created an experience. And the experience is not necessarily how neatly everything ties together, because that's not really how life is.
No, yeah.
So this is, I mean, to me, like Paper Girls is an indie comic in that it was, Brian K. Vaughan, and it was published on Image, but it was very pop storytelling. And this is much more indie through and through.
Yeah. Almost all those threads, as we talked about it on the back half of Paper Girls, almost all the threads they laid out in the first 3 volumes pretty much all got tied up, by the end.
Right.
That there aren't, time travel stories, so they're looping back and forth, and you're seeing things from different perspectives. When they start off in the first volume, you don't know who or when or where this character came from, and we see that tie back in later in the 4th or 5th or 6th volume. Here in Grass Kings, there are characters and aspects of the world that are just kind of thrown out there, and you see a little bit of.
It kind of grows like the Grass Kingdom itself, right?
Yeah.
There's some tall grass that you can get lost in. There's some weeds. That being said, I don't think there's anything I would change about it.
Yeah, I don't know if there would either. I think it's. I think from a reader standpoint, you could get a sense maybe that are the creators a little lost, because it sometimes feels like there's
that was certainly how I felt when it came out, when I read the second volume.
Yeah. You don't know what direction they're going in. Do they have a plan here? Because there is such a tonal shift from that first volume to the second volume.
And do they have the plan, I think, is the big... it's the double-edged sword. It's the curse of Tolkien on fantasy writing and fiction writing, is that we won't trust it unless there has to be a meticulous plan. And I think... that's it's an unfair standard that we wish was true more often than it actually is. I have seen things that are like that. They knew where they were going the whole time. It was meticulous, but it wasn't good.
Yeah.
It was just meticulous. And I've seen other people who have no idea what they're writing next week just produce great stuff. And I think, the biggest example I can think of is the Russo brothers said after Infinity War, they were like, we don't know how they're going to get out of this. Like, we know how the comics resolve things, but our goal when we wiped certain people out and they were snapped out of existence was we're going to leave ourselves enough pieces on the board that we could come up with a clever chess move. It's kind of like getting dropped into the back half of a chess match, and you just look at the board and say, okay, here's the pieces I have left. Here's where they are. What are all the possible moves I can make? And I'm like, I think that's a perfectly valid method of storytelling.
Well, I would agree. There's no value judgment on it, but I think there's sometimes you get into a scenario with a creator like J.J. Abrams, who is
I think he has a slightly unfair reputation, but
no. And I'm someone who really adores a lot of his work, but he has said repeatedly and publicly, like he has a very famous TED Talk about the mystery box, which for him, the entire point for him, like his main focus on storytelling is all about build-up. It's all about the mystery box, what's in the box. So for him, it's all about setup on things it could do and things that might happen. But when he then has to actually finish it and say what's going on, that's where he tends to stumble. And so that's why I think a lot of genre fans, people who may be reading comics or in that kind of same Venn diagram, worry about storytellers who don't have a plan because it's all just setup. It's all just seemingly being clever. Well, then you get to the end, and then, what was the execution for? What were you actually? Did you actually know what you were building to while you were building it? And yeah, but I do think you're right on the double-edged sword part, because sometimes you can build to that and have what you're building to.
Well, I
done.
I think the classic example on the other extreme was the show How I Met Your Mother. Yeah. People were very mad that they stuck to their original intention.
That they did the thing that the audience figured out years in advance.
Right.
And
they teased in the pilot.
Yeah.
But they had recorded the kids he's talking to reacting to the news that, the mom is dead. Yeah. And he wants to get together with Robin, but he feels weird about talking to his kids about it.
Years in advance. Because
they recorded that 7 years in advance, 9 years in advance, whatever it was.
Well, they recorded many years, at least many, not at the very, very beginning, but they recorded early enough.
That because the kids looked the same.
Yeah, because they had all aged out, and those two actors had.
But people were like, the show, that was your original intention, but the show evolved and grew past that. Yeah. And there were meaningful relationships undercut by you being so rigid about sticking to your original plan.
Yeah, and that's the other side about when you say you have a plan, you then don't allow for spontaneity, creativity, change in
like the chemistry between the actors, and things like that. Yeah. And I think in this book, first of all, big twist is Hemingway is the killer.
Yeah,
which they tease.
They do.
Because Hemingway says, I think in issue 2 or 3, that writers are the best liars.
Yes. Yeah.
Very enigmatic statement.
That might have been his first introduction.
The only thing you heard from him, I think, in volume 1.
When Bruce is going around, or they're going around, kind of around town to you just meet the other residents and everyone gets like a panel or two, right? That's right. In that spot.
So I think they knew, Kent and Jenkins knew that Hemingway was the killer that whole time.
Yes.
They did not know if that was going to matter or not.
I think so. Because
they didn't know if it was going to be a murder mystery.
Or how important the murder mystery was going to be.
Or if that was just going to be something that was, Cargill always has this on you guys, and you refuse to look into it. The story could have gone 40 issues with them never doing a murder mystery investigation.
Yeah.
And Cargill would always feel morally superior because they know there's a serial killer there that the Grass Kingdom's not looking into. Mm-hmm. So they did plant that seed, but they didn't plant murder mystery as a genre until the last page of volume 1.
Yeah. And then they shift focus, and that's all volume 2 is about.
Right.
It's all about looking into that.
And what volume 1 would tease is a big showdown between the Feds and the Grass Kingdom.
Yes.
Which we get.
We get it in volume 3 now.
Right. However, I love this, that they got it out of the way in issue 12 or 13 out of 15. Either way.
I think it technically ends the beginning of 14, because I think the end of 13 is when Barco's men, they shoot down the helicopter into the lake, and then Robert, instead of continuing to fight, decides to go in and save the pilots.
Yes.
And that's pretty much him saying truce. So but by the time we get into 14, the second to last issue.
Yes, 14, there it is.
It is
but it's resolved.
Yeah. It's
resolved
the battle's
before
over.
The finale, and I think if you hadn't read volume 2, you would think, well, what else is there to talk about?
Yeah.
After we have the showdown with the Feds, we finally use Barco and the other guy who's just chomping at the bit for this fight. Right?
Yeah.
And the Grass Kingdom, again, they don't want attention. They don't want to fight. And I think this is like a very important lesson for the 21st century, is that the Grass Kingdom sees themselves as the go-between between two different extremes. It's like the Cargill, the federal government, whatever, is totally overregulated. But these guys on the island, we respect them. We leave both parties alone. But those guys are nuts. Those are isolationists.
Yeah.
And
Barco and his crew on the island, those are the guys that, when we talk about this sovereign citizen movement, as it appears mostly in this country, that's the kind of group that we're talking about. The heavily armed, highly militiaed. I mean, those guys have full automatic weapons. They have RPGs, full tactical gear. Like those guys are ready to go to war. And they're actively looking to destroy what's going. Destroy the government in the country.
Yeah.
While the Grass Kings the kingdom is like, they're going to him because they need help, because they know the feds are coming. They've accepted the fact that the feds are coming in because they have pegged Archie as being a murderer, and that he's hiding out in this place. And, and those are story details that are they're important in terms of the dynamics within the kingdom, in terms of some of the interpersonal stuff. But it's the motivator simply to get the feds to come in and attack, because they know they're not gonna. The Grass Kingdom isn't just gonna give up one of their own, especially because they know the Grass Kingdom knows that Archie, all he's guilty of is like writing love letters and kind of wanting to have an affair. He's not guilty of anything else, but he has a guilty conscience, and the Grass Kingdom knows that they're not going to give him up, so they're going to defend themselves, and they kind of turn to the devil himself, Barco, and Barco even kind of says to them, like, we're not, like, we don't actually agree on things, but I respect what you're trying to do, so I'll help you out. And he helps them out up until Robert goes in to save the pilots. And at which point I think Barco's like, he's a coward, whatever, forget these guys.
Yeah.
And then they peace out, and we don't see him anymore.
But to me, the potent parable here is that I think 99.7% of humanity believes that they are centrist, moderate voice of reason.
Yeah.
And it's all who you're comparing yourself to.
Yeah.
If everyone is crazy far left or crazy far right, it's easy to feel like you are the middle ground, the reasonable middle. It's like the famous, I think it was Stephen Wright's stand-up, where he said, have you ever noticed that everybody driving slower than you is an idiot, and everybody driving faster than you is crazy? It's like only I know the appropriate speed to be driving, and that's what this is. And I think that is something they're commenting on in American life.
I think so.
And this is coming right after the 2016 election, where we're not going to get into that at all, but except to say everyone thought they were a reasonable position because they were comparing themselves to someone that was more extreme version of their views in either direction, so that everyone can feel like, oh, well, I'm not as crazy as those people over there. And that's the Grass Kingdom, right? They look at Barco and they're like, look, we're not that guy, even though to Cargill they look like the same.
Exactly. Cargill, and to the feds, they would make no distinction between Grass Kingdom or Barco's island there. They wouldn't, like, they would scoff at the idea that
there's no subtlety.
That Barco's like, no. We're our own thing. We're not part of the Grass Kingdom. And the feds would look at that and be like, what are you talking about? Like, you're all in one group there.
And presumably, which we don't get to see, Cargill also has those shades of gradation as well. Probably. And I think you would assume, for the most part, it's probably a normal town with mostly law-abiding citizens, yet your Sheriff Humbert is crooked and corrupt generationally.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, you do have some shades over on the Cargill side now. And so this isn't about two warring parties, which is how the human mind always wants to reduce and simplify things. There are like 7 different tribes here battling, and some of them are aligned in their interests briefly, like Barco with the Grass Kingdom here, or even Robert and Bruce, who think they are aligned
until they are.
They have very different values that they're working from. So they were only aligned as far as their intentions were. And so I think And as I'm talking about this, that's what I like about it. I like all of the complexity. I like all of the texture. I didn't need a tightly wrapped bundle at the end, even though I think you mostly get it.
You do for the characters of the Grass Kingdom. Oh, and I guess and in terms of Cargill, we only really have one character, and that's Humbert. And
right.
In the end, I think it's either implied or shown directly that since Bruce has left the kingdom, he's moved out to Cargill. He stays there, either runs for mayor or actually runs and wins, runs for sheriff and either unseats Humbert or is challenging for it. But in terms of the Grass Kingdom, I think there's sufficient kind of endings on their stories there. But I think when you look at the overall kind of narrative of surrounding this specific battle, I could see an argument where you're like, well, wait a minute. So like, what happens to Barca? What happens to the guys who are just there and
Right. They don't do the Animal House pause at the end and say, here's what happened for the next 30 years with this character. They ended up married and went to Cargill.
But see, those guys, I think there is I think there are some readers who could get to the end there and see that, so those are the militia guys. Those are the heavily militia guys. Those are the guys that the news stories end up always being about, because one of the feds after Robert kind of surrenders and offers a truce, one of the feds mentions something like, they're worried, they don't want this to go like another Waco or something like that. So even in the story, they're aware of something like Waco or like Ruby Ridge, some of these places that we've talked about previously. That's Barco and his guys on the island. That's who those guys are. And so I think there could be a segment who sees that, because again, he's just a name in the first volume. There's the real brief cameo in the second volume when
you get his voice in the shadows, right? Or do you get a silhouette?
He steps out to confront Asher and Pinball. Yes. Yeah, but it's clear there's something going on, and you assume it's about arms dealing. And obviously that's kind of confirmed in this third one. We actually see that these guys are fully equipped. So I think there's a segment of readers
and they know how to use it. I mean, that to me is always he's ex-military,
and you have to assume all the guys. He's an ex-Navy SEAL. I guess you have to assume that all the guys with him, they're probably also ex-military. It's like
right.
It's like Ed Harris in The Rock.
That's what I was just gonna say is The Rock. Yes, I was like, this is like what you're describing is now The Rock.
Which is why I think there are some readers who get there and say, who could think that could be a more interesting story, because that's a story we see in real life. The idea of the armed militia going at the feds, Now,
they left themselves space that they could come back and do that.
They could, but I think by the time you get to the end of this story in Grass Kings, I think it's clear to me that story of armed, sovereign citizens fighting against the government, like that's not the story Kenton Jenkins wanted to tell. That wasn't their focus.
And this is what we hit as hard I think as we could in the Zero episode, is that's the setting. That isn't the story.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard thing. When I picked this up, I thought the setting was the story.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you have to get over the shock of it's got this insanely interesting premise that is just the backdrop.
Yeah, that isn't their focus.
It's not the foreground. Mm-hmm. Which frankly, even the cover art kind of makes it seem like that.
Yeah, a lot of the cover art is kind of, almost like scenes from the Grass Kingdom.
Right.
Whether it's
and I'll say again, any one of these covers is beautiful enough to stick in a frame and put on my wall.
Yeah, they're great. They're great.
Tyler Jenkins, and on one hand, I find this obnoxious when I buy comics and I buy bags and boards at the same time. As a collector, I love not putting the barcode on the front cover. As someone who then bags it and then you take it up to the counter and they're like, and they have to pull it out to scan it on the back cover. So your comic shop proprietor typically prefers a barcode on the front. But to me, like, it's just so clean and it's so beautiful. And do you notice a big color shift here thematically with Hillary taking over the colors?
Not really. I don't think so.
I mean, presumably they're even sharing a studio.
Yeah.
I think hers are a little more muted. I don't think she gets as vivid as Tyler does. If you just flip through them,
I don't know,
side by side.
That's
now,
interesting.
He's looking through single issues.
Yeah.
I'm doing. I like sending off, especially short runs like this of 15. So, like, if you look at the beginning of issue 3, so I've got them all bound into one volume. Open number 3, and you get that, like, bright red sunset. I can scroll through all of, compare that to the opening of 15, which is also a morning sunset with just a hint of that pink. So it's getting, like, a little bleaker, a little darker. And if you just flip through issue 14, it's a lot of muted grays and stuff. I think the most colorful panel is that conversation with the devil, where the identity is intentionally concealed, and it's kind of blood red. It's not like this beautiful sunset and all of these other things you see.
Well, that could be.
They stopped tracing the history of the Grass Kingdom.
They do.
In these
the
opening panels.
That is the one of the shifts from the.
And that was consistent through the first 2.
It was. Now, you get a slightly different here when you start the third volume here in issue 12.
That's really. I mean, that looks like CSI, right?
Yeah, but that's it. Not history of the Grass Kingdom, but that is a flashback to Cargill. But it does have the same framing narrative device where the text boxes are present day, because
but that's a Kent thing to me. Yeah, that's Matt Kent.
They've kept that there, even though we're now just getting more history, because this is what they're framing here is Bruce over in Cargill. He's basically kind of reinvestigate the Thin Air killer. So
and to be clear, I was not criticizing Hillary. In fact, I think with something as vivid and beautiful as watercolors, it's much more. It's more difficult to be restrained, and to do like this opening of issue 12, where everything is kind of cool grays and darker colors, even though there's like a red sailboat with a red. It's still muted and it's still with. It's like, I don't know. To me, I'm not an artist. That seems like it takes a lot of restraint when you're working with something as beautiful as watercolors. And when I think of like the book AD After Death, there are full pages where Jeff Lemire just made something really beautiful with watercolors, and Scott Snyder had nothing to add to it. So there's just pages of silence just taking in, because watercolors are such a great. They're so expressive.
And I wonder too. I mean, it could have been an intentional storytelling choice. The idea that, the story gets pretty dark and dour here. There's an attack on the kingdom, and also this revelation about
Humbert's backstory is really dark.
Yeah,
you see physical abuse even into adulthood.
Yeah.
And then you see the generational thing, with his wife, and he grabs the belt buckle, and again,
and then the deal that they made with that his father made with Hemingway,
right? Okay. So let me make sure I understand that deal with Hemingway. The deal is, I can cash in on you anytime I want, but the more I let you do this, the bigger deal it will be for me, because you'll be a more infamous serial killer.
Well, that's what Hemingway said. Hemingway, you got maybe the perspective wrong. Hemingway is saying, let me work so I can become great. Right. And then when I'm done, you can make a career off of me.
Yes. So that's the first part. And I think the second part is also, I will take care of problems for you. Like the people I will knock off in my quest for greatness will be people who were problems for you anyway, whether they're in the Grass Kingdom or not.
Well, and I think mainly the idea is that, part of that deal was, when I am done, I'll be in the Grass Kingdom. I'm going there. Right. So when you do catch me,
and you can kick down the door.
Yeah.
Okay.
You come in. I'll be with those people, the people that you hate. That hatred that was passed down from Humbert Sr. to Humbert Jr.
Right.
So when Hemingway's like, when you come, when I'm done, after you've allowed me to become,
and I write my book.
Yeah, exactly. I write my book. Do all this stuff here. When you come and get me, when I'm ready to be done with this, I'll be in the Grass Kingdom. And so you come in and that gives you license to take them all down because they've been hiding me this whole time, So
right.
that's the deal that Humbert Sr. made that got passed down to Humbert Jr. And along with all the other horribly negative qualities. But so the idea that we're wrapping up and we end on this kind of sad, dour murder mystery, and even it ends, the last thing Hemingway does as Robert is giving him his own aerial funeral, for which he's not actually dead yet, Hemingway tries to taunt him one last time. He's like, you want to know about your daughter Rose?
Yes,
and he's like, did she drown? Was she one of my victims? He's like, I'm not going to tell you.
That's where but I'm not an interrogator, but that's where I would have taken a flaming barrel and held his book over it and said, this is the only thing you care about. You give me this piece of information, I'll send this off to a publisher. I mean, you're still going to die, but either this gets published or this doesn't. I don't care. But, the only piece that's not in this book is the one I want. So that's what I would have done. Perhaps I've watched too many anti-hero dramas.
Yeah. But no,
it's what they would do in The Wire.
Yeah, that probably would be. But it's the idea that, so even at the end there, Robert has gotten to a place where he's, I don't know about at peace with it, but he understands that that's no longer a driving motivator in his life. So it does end on a bit of a dour. It's a more muted note. It's not celebratory.
Would it be plausible if they had this little adventure, they solved a murder mystery, or he brought in Maria and something like that, and all of a sudden he was like, great, I feel great about not knowing what happened to my kid. My kid's gone. I'm totally over it now. And I think going back to the foundation of the story, Tyler Jenkins knows deep down, if anything ever happens to one of my kids, I never get over it. Mm-hmm. Like, you do move on, but you carry it with you everywhere.
But there is no, even at the end of this story, there is no celebration. Archie is still in jail for a crime he didn't commit, but because he feels tremendous guilt anyway, he accepts that punishment, and he knows that in some way it benefits the Grass Kingdom. If he gives himself up and goes to jail and takes a fall for this, they're going to be left alone. They've caught the Thin Air killer. We know the truth about that now. He's gotten rid of it.
The Humberts are dislodged.
Yeah, the Humberts are no longer in charge over in Cargill.
Which is like, on the whole, if you add up the pluses and minuses,
it's a lot of wins. It's a lot of wins.
Yes,
it's a lot of wins. But still, at the end, I think you have a note about it there. At the very, very end, there's some, there's some narration boxes about, it seems like they got everything they wanted. The feds are leaving them alone now. But there's a note about
Maria stays, right? Or she comes back.
Yeah. Maria's there, and I don't think anyone. From what we see, I don't think there are any casualties in terms of the characters.
No. I mean, there are in the relationships, right?
Yeah.
Like, Bruce is not coming back.
Yeah. I'm saying when the feds
no one
attack.
dies. Yeah.
When the feds are gone. They're rebuilding the kingdom. Asher and Pinball are, the back playing in the band, everyone.
By the way, can I just say...
It seems like there are a lot of wins, and yet it's not a cause. You don't get to the end, and they're not celebrating. It is still real dour and muted because I think they feel that maybe they just kind of... It's not about winning or losing. It's really just about kind of existing, and they're allowed to go on another day because, they when you add it all up, it seems like they came out ahead in a lot of ways. But they're not in a position. They're not the kind of mindset to take that kind of victory lap, to feel that
Right.
kind of happiness and celebration.
And I think the colors match. But since Pinball and Asher are not going to come up again, I don't think.
Probably not.
I'm just going to take my one shout out that I really enjoyed as Pinball destroys Asher's amplifier. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels with the amp. And I think I was especially drawn to this, 1, because I am a musician. 2, I know Tyler Jenkins is a musician. And 3, Jim Campbell is a musician. The name on the amplifier is Bumper, which the most famous, amplifier maker is Fender. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty sure they could have written the word Fender, but I think they were just like, no, this isn't. We never said this is America. We never said this was a state. This is like its own parallel existence, and Bumper is what they chose instead of Fender. But I do have to say that it's got the silver face to it, and with the number of knobs and inputs, I'm going to call that a Princeton reverb. So just if anyone wants to appreciate the little details that go into a sketch and watercolor combo, you could Google Fender Princeton reverb, and I think you'll see an amp that looks exactly like what he's destroying. And you'll see that a current one costs probably $1,200 for a little tiny amp like that. It's not a giggable size amp. It's very small.
Yeah, that's probably rough for Asher there.
And probably this is not a reissue. This is probably a vintage. I get the impression that they get like their cars are all kind of old and cool.
Yeah, they're not getting a lot of new stuff in the Grass Kingdom.
Right. So probably realistically a $10,000-$20,000 amp if it's a '60s Fender Princeton reverb.
That Pinball just chucked over the edge.
But probably more to the
30,
point,
40 feet down.
They don't have a guitar shop in the Grass Kingdom, and they don't use currency in the Grass Kingdom. Yeah. I don't know how he would get another one. I guess they get paid for their gigs in Cargill.
Yeah,
they would just keep that cash and use it in Cargill. That's a lot of playing gigs without an amp in order to get an amp.
Yeah. Or it seemed like those guys, Pinball and Asher, had some connections for some things in some of the towns, whether it's Cargill or Raven or whatnot. So they maybe a little more on the worldly side. I don't know where they could get an amp from someone. Maybe they know someone who runs like a pawn shop or something like that.
Yeah, but I love this, that here you've got very small characters who almost don't even come up in this volume, who still represent all of the factions in play. You've got Pinball, who's a native of the Grass Kingdom and basically wants out. Like, he doesn't mind it, but he gets out as often as he can.
Yeah, he wants more. I don't think he wants out. I think he wants more.
Right.
Yeah.
And Asher, who is, as the baby of the Monarch family, such a loyalist that he doesn't even see it as betraying his friend to hand over incriminating information about his friend's father, because it's like, well, my allegiance is to the Grass Kingdom, and this is what's best for the Grass Kingdom.
It's for the
even though I'm not sure it is best for the Grass Kingdom.
It actually wasn't. Well, so it might have been.
But it felt like something the son of a monarch would do.
It might have been if the tape had just stayed with Robert, but because
but this is kind of the spoiled prince mentality of Asher.
Yeah. My brother will take care of it. It's all good there.
Right.
But because he took the tape and gave it to Robert, and then that tape got stolen by Lowe, the kid that Humbert Jr. sent in. Again, he stole and brought that back, and so that tape then got out. It kind of broke contain and got out of the Grass Kingdom, and that set the chain of reaction off of events of the feds coming in for Archie, for Pinball's dad. So, but yeah, no, there's the idea of Asher's not going to face any consequences here. So he looks at things from the view of, well, listen, my brother's in charge. He'll take care of it.
Right.
He's looking out for all of us here. We have to know. The collective have to know what's going on so we can help each other.
Which is actually a different take than Robert has.
Yeah.
Bruce feels that way, for sure.
Yeah.
To the point where Bruce doesn't come back.
Yeah.
And I assume they have an off-screen amicable reconciliation where it's like...
Yeah.
It's okay because Bruce isn't living there anymore. It's like,
we're
still brothers.
Yeah.
but you've showed me that you don't care about the kingdom like I do.
Yeah.
So you're better off in Cargill.
Well,
and just imagine how cushy the relationship between Cargill and Grass Kingdom will be when the sheriff,
when he's sheriff,
Grass Kingdom royalty.
He's endeared himself to the neighboring town. But yeah, their main fallout was about how to go about investigating the Thin Air Killer. What resources, what they were going to do, how far they were going to go. Bruce wanted to, turn over every stone everywhere to find an answer. And Robert was like, no, we're keeping this in-house. This is all about us.
Right.
And so now that we've resolved that, and we know it's Hemingway, and Robert got kind of the final say on that by essentially, feeding him to the birds and getting rid of him. So that main point of contention between the two of them is gone now. And I would imagine Robert probably reached out to Bruce. I could see a situation where he reached out and said, hey, you're welcome back. You're my brother.
Right.
We're still good here. You can come back anytime. And Bruce was like, you know what? No, I'm good. Because Bruce left before, remember? He left in his younger days.
That makes me feel good that we both imagine
yeah.
these loose ends that tie up just beyond the last page.
Yeah. Because Bruce had left before.
And I think that means it's well written, right?
I think so,
we have enough grasp of those two characters that even after the last page, we have some idea of how these lines do eventually converge.
I think so.
Which is how... I don't suppose you ever read Infinite Jest.
No.
It's the monster tome from David Foster Wallace that's like totally scrambled postmodern fiction that has no resolution at all. And he's like, they were asking about it, and he was like, I actually think the resolution is there just beyond the last page. Like, if you actually understood all the threads that were going on, all of the lines were headed toward each other in a perpendicular way. The last page just ends right before they touch. And I really like that kind of storytelling.
I do too. I think
I don't need the hand-holding moment.
It all depends on execution, though, because there are plenty of stories that try to do that and fumble it horribly.
Right. Well, and I thought that's what Paper Girls was doing. When it zooms out, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're not going to be friends.
Yeah, what
and it's
happened?
like nothing changed, nothing happened. Yeah. And then they give you that one satisfying snap back in for just a page or two. And it's like, you don't see them hanging out, and it doesn't flash forward to them being friends in their 30s. Yeah. But all of that's happening because you know how important this relationship is. Yeah. How they all lamented in the future selves letting go of it. Mm-hmm. And that is, the bite out of the forbidden apple.
Yeah. But I think we get those moments just beyond the page for the characters in the Grass Kingdom. Our main characters.
I think we know the trajectory.
But for most of them, their trajectory is we're just still in the Grass Kingdom.
Sure, that's the Satellite Sisters. But I think you get a sense of where Asher and Pinball will end up.
Yeah.
I think Pinball's likely to take more of the Bruce route in the end.
Maybe so.
And stay on good terms.
But we see they've reunited. They're playing in their band again. But who knows what happens.
They could play in a band while living in different towns.
Well, exactly. They could.
A mere 40 miles apart, which in this part of the country doesn't seem to be that big of a distance.
No, probably
That's
not.
the nearest town.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Satellite Sisters, we get in 12, not really much happens with them in this arc. They're kind of even Steven. Archie, is there anything else to say about Archie? Aside from, he confesses to Big Dan's murder, which covers
Maria.
Mm-hmm. And that's a noble thing to do. This kind of thing always drives me a little crazy. Kind of like the end of the movie Dark Knight, where Batman's like, I killed those cops, tell them it was me. And it's like, or we could blame it on the Joker, who has been killing people the whole movie, and the whole city is aware of him. He's been executing people on TV. Maybe just blame the cop killer on the Joker, the built-in scapegoat here, and you don't have to create this whole controversy with Harvey Dent and hunting Batman. And to me, it was like, yeah, they found out at the end of this it was Hemingway was the murderer. What's one more? Just put Big Dan on him. It's equally dishonest, but at least it like gives you a little more freedom.
Yeah, there's a hole in that plot there definitely, and I think,
but it's not a hole. I mean, I do think this is how people would do it, and the chronology of this, he confesses to Big Dan before we find out Hemingway was the murderer.
Yeah.
Then you can't renege on it and be like, oh, or no, I didn't do that.
Didn't do that.
It was somebody else.
The other guy, yeah. But I think part of it...
It's just one of those things where had they communicated a little better...
Yeah. I think part of it with Archie, too, is that Archie gets shot, during the battle there. So he's almost like he's bleeding out there.
Which you would think is atonement enough for having technically not done anything.
Yeah.
He was emotional abandonment.
But I think that's part of the impetus for Robert to look around and be like, if we don't end this somehow, like everyone's gonna die, you know. So that's kind of the main motivating factor at that point, because again they were willing enough to start, but it became very clear that they didn't have the firepower to end it. We see shots throughout the battle of some of the various other people. They're all pitching in. Everyone is kind of doing what they can, but they're woefully outnumbered, woefully outmatched.
And they're restrained, and they hint at some ultimatum they have, like they've got explosives rigged underground or something.
Yeah,
but Robert does not want to use that.
Yeah,
and in fact, he didn't even want to use Barco. Barco shoots down the helicopter. Thankfully, everyone's fine. Their van is blown up. The local news shows up, which we haven't had a lot of media coverage. I think they've hinted at it, but the media seems like they've kind of lost interest in the Grass Kingdom. It's it's just that weird thing over there. Nothing really happens.
It seems like the main media coverage was back when the Thin Air Killer was maybe a little more prominent.
Right.
And the idea of this Grass Kingdom maybe was a little more novel. And since it appears that Hemingway has slowed down in terms of his victims. So
he's just worried about recounting it all.
He's writing them now. Yeah. So because he is now less active as a serial killer, there is now less interest, I guess, in the Grass Kingdom. No one really cares about it now.
By the way, I really don't want to get into this again, except that I clearly do. At the beginning of 15, you learned that the Grass Kingdom is north of Tampa Bay.
Well, yeah. I think I mentioned that, the idea that Hemingway said early on he came up from Florida. So we knew Hemingway was in Florida because he
which
says,
takes out, though, to me that eliminates the Mountain and Central Time, and that maybe puts it in Georgia or even the Panhandle of Florida. That being said,
I still think that's too far south.
People are very
that's too far south.
People are very loose with using the word up.
You
know, I know people from Cincinnati who say, "Oh yeah, we're going up to Florida this week," and I'm like, "That's the long way. It's much faster to go down to Florida. Like it's a globe, so technically it works, but So the parlance could be the same, and I do think that kind of lazy geography.
Again, it is intentional.
You don't need to be a cartographer to appease me, but come on, you get the general direction.
I think for the
there is a mountain still here, and there's no mountains. I don't think in the Panhandle.
No,
I think in Georgia you could get beach mountains.
Well, actually, yeah. If you look at that little one shot of Raven, those are like snow-capped. Like those aren't the mountains.
Those are jagged. Yeah, they're not.
They're not like the Appalachians, the Smoky Mountains, like that. Those are actually snow-covered. So
okay, so here's the thing. At that point, I would say, okay, this is totally fictitious, except that they invoked Tampa. It's like, why would you throw one real thing in just to mess with us? Just let it be a fictitious America and make up one more name. Even if they'd used an anagram for Tampa Bay. I can't come up with anagrams off the top of my head.
Well,
I don't have that skill.
I think the fact that it's never named, it's never identified, is the entire point, that this could be anywhere in the country. Even though it clearly can't be anywhere in the country because we see mountains, there's a lake, there's farmland and whatnot. It's everything there, but it's meant to stand in for anywhere USA. So
yeah. I just use an anagram generator. There's nothing good for Tampa Bay.
It's Tampa.
Yeah, Tampa, there would probably be one. But anyway.
So
that's... I think we've hit now Robert Bruce Asher, ostensibly
those are the main
your top three build.
Yeah.
The Humberts, who's also in the original Boom synopsis. It was those three and Humbert. Maria, we circle back on. Archie, we've covered. Thin Air Killer, Hemingway is covered.
I guess my question with that is, so we talked about the, wrapping up our us against the world viewpoint.
Yeah.
The Grass Kingdom versus the outside world with the feds coming in, big battle that basically ends before the end of the comic, because the comic ends on Hemingway. So how do you feel the Thin Air Killer reveal was handled? The fact that it was Hemingway, what his plan was, what his motivation was as a serial killer, that it wasn't really about the killing, it was about the aftermath.
Yeah, it was about watching the pain unfold in someone's life.
Yeah.
And I think for Tyler Jenkins, the thought of losing a kid and him processing the trauma, he's like, can you imagine if some psychopath, that was what they got off on. That's what they liked, was not the killing, but watching my life decline afterward. I thought was actually a pretty clever way to tie back in the original premise. You had the early Easter egg of him saying writers are the best liars, which is enigmatic enough that they didn't have to do anything with it, but I think that comes back in play. And the fact that he has this specific fetish for killing, and that is the introductory struggle of the series. You see Maria getting out of the water, and you realize this is Robert's pain point.
Whether it's connected to Hemingway's work or not, we actually don't know.
It doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter.
It's the specter of it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the fact that, okay, now we've got two major plot threads throughout the entire series that are actually playing in the same arena. Even if they're not directly playing off each other, the fact that they're all dealing with the same issue.
They're not real cohesive, because the idea of...
No, but they're in the same orbit. I guess, a vague way to say it.
Yeah.
So anyway, to me, I found that like the right level of satisfaction. To me, it was like it would feel a little trite after all of this ground to say, oh yeah, it was Hemingway. Hemingway killed your daughter, and it's all wrapped up now.
Or, and I would also think it'd be pretty trite if it turned out that, oh no, it was Humbert Jr., because before, there's a lesser version of the story, I think, in which Humbert Sr. is the original killer.
Oh yeah,
and then it's passed down to Humbert Jr. And
yeah,
the idea is
and that they're trying to
frame it. They're trying to frame it on the Grass Kingdom.
They're creating a flimsy pretext while also.
Yeah. I think there's a lesser version of the story, because that keeps Humbert as the purely evil mustache twirling villain that he's introduced as.
Right.
That he is completely
Instead of,
one-dimensional.
After 10 pages into 12,
you see he's a product of his father.
You feel bad for him.
Yeah.
Again, it does not excuse his behavior with Maria or anything like that, but it does explain it.
But
and makes him somewhat sympathetic, and it's like sympathy for the devil, right? It's like you've hated him for 12 or for 11 full issues, and then you realize, like, oh, he is a pitiable.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. It may be sympathy. I didn't have sympathy for him, but I have understanding for him. You think about the number.
Oh no, I feel bad for him.
Yeah. Well,
sympathetic is that's what I mean.
Sure.
I feel bad for him. I'm not rooting for him.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. But you do see, that the idea of an abusive parent and abusive husband, abusive spouse, that is passed down. You know, the number of people who commit acts of abuse are typically victims of abuse themselves. It's a perpetuating cycle, and you see that here.
Right.
That Humbert's father beat down him. You know,
that kind of pain is the uniting factor of the Grass Kingdom.
Yeah.
And in another world, if he hadn't followed in his father's footsteps to become the sheriff, he may have fled and gone to the Grass Kingdom.
He'd been a guy in a trailer out there just being like, you know what, I got to get away from my life.
He's a perfect candidate.
Yeah. But he stayed.
And I think that's the painful part.
I think so.
Is to say, he probably could have not been dominated by his pain. I can't say that people go to the Grass Kingdom to be healed. They go to ignore it.
There's a bit of hiding from it, but it gives them a space to potentially,
and they stop damaging other people.
I'll say, maybe they don't deal with it themselves, but they don't take it out on somebody else,
right?
And that could be maybe an underlying thing with Humbert Jr. On top of the inherited hatred that he gets from his father for these people and what they're doing out there, and the fact that, you know, they probably have this killer hiding among them, which he's known for years. You know, he knows they're there, and, you know, he's kind of struggling with that because we see him kind of push back against that early when he's still his father's deputy, but he's now obviously fully embraced it. There's a part of him that maybe thought that if years ago he had just left Cargill, left his father behind, and gone this other way, that maybe his life, he wouldn't be in the position he's in right now. But clearly he didn't feel like he was in a position where he could get out from under his father's thumb. You know, his father was so domineering, so controlling, that it was never an option for him.
In my head, I go back to that panel, I think in Volume 1, very near the end, where there's a confrontation between Bruce and Humbert.
Yes, they meet.
And they're both wearing uniforms.
Yeah, they meet at the edge of town. Yep.
And Humbert says, you know, you got no business wearing that uniform. And by the end of the story, we kind of realize, like, they should have switched places.
Yeah.
Bruce should be the sheriff, and he's about to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Humbert should have been in the Grass Kingdom. Mm-hmm. He's got pain that he's avoiding and suppressing.
And lashing out on everyone else around him.
Right.
And
it's like they should have actually switched spots. Mm-hmm. And again, that's not something that Kent and Jenkins are going to, like, lay out there for you. They've just created a complex enough world that when you sit back and chew on it a little bit and you start thinking about these characters, that's the type of realization you can come to. And to say, you know, I guess on one hand, there wouldn't even have been a story if people were just where they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like, if all these spaces existed and you could just naturally file into the place you belong,
there wouldn't be the conflict.
There wouldn't be a story, yeah.
Yeah.
And so having a law-driven person living in a lawless land, I think Bruce is the most interesting character.
Yes. Bruce has...
I don't know that we're doing those kind of superlatives.
I don't think so, but...
If I have to pick a favorite, and I don't mean that his hands are clean and I want everything good to happen to him, but if I had to pick a favorite, I think Bruce, the tension of Bruce, is the most interesting character to me.
I think so too. And because he is, in a way, he's living the ethos of the Grass Kingdom by not remaining there. Because the idea, he's deciding to be true to himself, what he believes, kind of his stance on the world. And he gets that he can't do that in the Grass Kingdom anymore.
Right.
And he understands that he can still pursue that in the outside world. You know, he can do that in Cargill. He can be that. He can do the thing he's good at, which is be an investigator, be a sheriff, you know, be a real law enforcement officer. He can do that from a place that, when the story began, was the antithesis of what he thought he believed in, which was the greater world, the outside world. But that actually isn't what's important to him. It's the idea of being a cop, helping others, trying to find the truth, regardless of where that truth is. And he comes to that realization.
Which I actually thought at the end, before I noticed the little vote sign, that he had opened a private eye business.
I think he had. He started with that. He started with being a PI, and then runs for sheriff. I think that's what's implied right there.
Yeah, and by the way, if you notice the little logo he's used is a crown, which is the same as Robert's hat.
Yep. Well, and again,
and I like that it's hovering above this woman's head.
Yeah,
I'm like, it seems like they did it on purpose, but I can't make heads or tails of any meaning they would be implying there. This is the second to last page.
Yeah, second, third to last page, something like that.
Yeah.
Also, are their last names? Are they the Kings? Are they? I don't see. That was one thing.
My gosh, King Investigations. I think it is. So it's the Grass Kingdom, and it's the King family.
Okay, that just hit me there. So it's Bruce and Robert and Asher King, I guess.
Yeah, and Robert is. So we were talking about this right before we recorded. They even put us on the map, and the king is dead. Long live the king, or the long live the king. Which is the quote from I wrote Chuck the Seventh, Charles the Seventh. France, 1422. That was how he announced the death of his father, Charles VI. And it's to say the continuity of the monarchy of the old king is dead, but the monarchy lives on, so it's cause for celebration. Mm-hmm. But I think he's just referring to himself. Like, the old Robert has died, the new Robert is born and is king. Yeah. And I think he's going to be a much more engaged person now with the kingdom. Not that people that really want a ton of engagement, but he's not going to be the drunk guy that everyone has to steer clear of.
Well, not only he's no longer the drunk guy everyone steers clear of. He's also doesn't have to be the kind of the military general defending the group from the outside, because we get a sense, and the way he says it is that the feds have agreed to leave them alone now. So
so he's kind of a swords into plowshare.
Yeah. So he no longer has to be the protector either, because what it seems the outside forces are lesser in terms of pressure from Cargill, obviously pressure from the federal government and all that. So he no longer has to be the hyper vigilant guy that he needs to be, that we saw when Cargill attacked in Volume 1 and when the feds attacked in Volume 3. That isn't a worry for him, but he's no longer the wallowing in self-pity guy who's just drunk on his porch staring out the lake anymore. So it's the idea that, maybe, and that this version, whatever this first iteration of the Grass Kingdom was, where it had a more antagonistic relationship, maybe not actively antagonistic relationship with the outside world, but it definitely didn't have a symbiotic one. Maybe that version of the kingdom is dead, and now we have moved into a new phase. So because of the fallout with Bruce, with the revelation about Hemingway / Humberts, the Humberts, Archie going to prison and all that, like all these factors have culminated in like the first age of the Grass Kingdom being done.
Right.
Now we're moving into the second age of the Grass Kingdom. And there could be, whatever potential stories are out in line, or that may lay ahead. It seems like Robert will still be in charge, but maybe it's a different Robert, a changed Robert, somewhere that's really come to a different level of understanding than he had prior. Yeah,
and to me that wraps it pretty well. I mean, we've hit everything in this, and I think even expounded on things that tie up beyond the last page. So are there any closing thoughts? Do you want to belittle this by doing like a star rating or something? Just final concluding thoughts.
I think my concluding thought...
Or even ranking the 3 volumes now that we've done that. I mean, we did that with Paper Girls, but that I thought was a little easier because there was a lot more consistency.
There's more cohesion to the story, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think it is tough to rank these because there are the tone shifts so hard across each volume. So I don't know if I want to rank them. I will say I think the comparison you made at the beginning of the episode about this being more of like indie cinema kind of thing. The idea that it's a little more open-ended, it's less defined, and that's the whole point. The point is about the world and the vibe, and you get a story within that world and a story within that vibe, but it's not all wrapped up. It's not all clean. It's less concerned about having an A plot, a B plot, a setup, delivery. There's less to worry about the traditional narrative story structure in terms of hitting
to
these
me, it's
plot
more
points.
like a Noah Baumbach movie.
Yeah, it you know what it does. It has if Mumblecore were a comic book, it would.
Exactly.
Grass Kings would fit into that category, I think. And I think a book like this, the challenges it faces when trying to get across to readers, I think, is the lack of a defined tone, because
I think that's clear from Boom's marketing.
Yeah,
they didn't know what they had.
It doesn't have an elevator pitch, because your elevator pitch to start the series off would be about the Grass Kingdom versus the outside world. It's about this insular community that's trying to live off the grid. Except it's not actually what it's about. It ends up being about something else, because your elevator pitch for
that's
volume
a different
2
pitch than Tyler's initial pitch to Matt, which was like, I want
it's
to
about
write
loss
about
and
what
grieving.
It would be like. You're right.
Yeah, but then your pitch for volume 2 is about a potential serial killer and a murder mystery investigation.
Right.
So that lack of consistency in terms of what brought you into the story, what would hook you in. If you came for one thing, you undoubtedly got another by the time the book was over. Or even
no matter
through.
Which one you were looking for.
Yeah. You didn't get the thing you were actually or potentially looking for, and that can hurt a series. And it's not to say they made a mistake in terms of their storytelling, because they told the story that they wanted to do. But I think you can understand why a book like this has a harder time getting traction.
Yes. Oh, for sure. And to me, my favorite page is in the last episode. It's, I think, the only one with 9 panel, which is a very classic comic look.
Yeah. Great panel. Great page.
And I think, to me, first of all, in modern, in old comics, you'll definitely see a lot of 9 panel pages, and to great effect. Which I know it's a big 2, but I still feel like we may end up doing Mr. Miracle at some point, just because it's so good. But Mr. Miracle, the entire book is all 9-page panels, except when it isn't.
Yeah.
There are like 7 breaks in the 9-panel thing, and it just grabs your attention. But this, having the face, and this is really the pivotal moment for Robert. This is where the 2 stories converge, and this is where he is no longer controlled by his grief over his daughter. He has this guy that, back in issue 1, if Hemingway had dangled this in front of him, Robert would have burnt down Cargill and the kingdom to find out what happened to his daughter.
Everything scorched earth.
If you had this, and so to me, this is where the serial killer story meets the grief story, meets the autonomy and the weight of the crown, and all of this other, like, all of the elements are really in this showdown here, and we see Robert emerge as a hero, not clean knight in shining armor, but he does the heroic act, the selfless act, and he grows as a result of it. And to me, that's what makes it a great story and what makes it a great ending, because it actually does end all of the things that were in place. So to me, it's like Volume 3 is my favorite by a long shot, because I do think they stick the landing exactly how they needed to, especially with the way they painted themselves in here. But obviously, Volume 3 wouldn't be any good at all without Volumes 1 and 2. So it's like,
1 and 2 separately, not so much 1 then 2.
Right, that's like saying, Empire's my favorite Star Wars movie, but Empire Strikes Back is nothing without A New Hope. So, the whole point of ranking things is stupid, other than to say, if I remembered the stories well enough and I was only going to pick up 3 or, a few issues here, I would reread the ending.
The conclusion of this story works based on the setup there. Yeah, I think I would agree. I think it is overall a satisfying ending to those threads that were presented in terms of the specific kind of plot points. I think that stuff is done very well. I think the open-endedness of the world and the other potential ways they could have taken the story outside of the murder mystery aspect in terms of the setting. They're
right.
But
here's the question though: do you think this is a typical representation of this collaboration? I haven't read Black Badge. Is it similar? Do they do pivot genres? Do they kind of start one way and say, we're going to take it this way instead?
Black Badge is a little more straightforward. It's a little more of a direct narrative story.
A little easier elevator pitch. Which perhaps it was a correction. It
might. Black Badge is a very easy elevator pitch. Versus because it really is kind of one story. This is multiple intertwining, weaving things, and the story is where they interconnect, not where they end. Yeah. But no, I think it's a good example though of a different way that the medium can work. That it's not always just about sometimes it is a little more about vibe and feel and about place and defining a place and then setting any story. And this story didn't have to be murder mystery. They had set up this idea of the Grass Kingdom versus Cargill. They still could have gone in a way where the main story wasn't about the Grass Kingdom versus Cargill. It could have been any kind of story.
It could have been.
Any kind of story set in this.
It could have been the feds coming in and it being guerrilla warfare.
Yeah. It could have been. It could have been instead of a murder mystery in there. It could have been. You could have been a whole. It could have been a quasi romance comic. It could be a relationship comic set in the world of the Grass Kingdom, this wannabe semi-autonomous state. The setting was there. They happened to choose this murder mystery to tell their story about grief.
Right.
It's a not the most linear way to get there. When you're starting with the idea of a story of grief,
life isn't linear.
It isn't.
That. The only thing that's linear like that are like purely fictionalized stories, pop stories.
But if I gave you, your three headings there, here's your setting, here is your theme, and then here is the way here's your plot points. You wouldn't have picked semi-autonomous state in the United States as your setting,
right?
Murder mystery as your story and plot, and personal grief and loss as your theme. Those three combined are
although I will say the personal
rare.
Grief and loss is a very common thing with the noir mystery thing, right?
100%.
Your detective is always scarred and has baggage.
100%.
But to create such an elaborate fictionalized world for it, it is what that is the difference between this and your classic Ed Brubaker, Sean Phelps noir mystery. Mm-hmm. They do a ton of noir mysteries. Yeah. The setting is usually not super important.
They're typically set in the real world. They're kind of
taken for granted. Even the Fade Out, which I think we will probably do at some point, is set in Golden Era Hollywood.
Yeah, that's set during the Blacklist era Hollywood. Criminal, their long-running anthology series, that's set in. I think it's set in New York City.
Right, which is big cover. You can do.
Yeah, anything. Their books are they don't have even some of the books like Sleeper or Incognito that have a superhero-ish element to them. They're still based in the real world. These are people who have been experimented on, and if that were the case, then they got that kind of thing. To put the work that Kent and Jenkins did into developing a very specific identity for their setting, not just being we're in New York in 1930. That's that you do that in one text box and boom, you're done.
Right.
Here they put in the work to set up and develop this unique setting that ultimately isn't super important. The specifics actually become less important.
I think if there's fan letdown, that's the letdown is that you built this elaborate thing and then you didn't really use it.
The specifics of that world became less and less important. And so that's why I think if you came to the first volume with the idea of this story of this community of people trying to live this way. If that was your hook, then I think as you would go through, especially in that second volume, you'd be like, what am I reading here? Because that's the murder mystery investigation. So,
and if I had to tweak anything about it, I would have dropped the taunt from Humbert to Robert or Bruce.
To Bruce there at the end of the
I would have dropped that at maybe the end of the first issue, the second issue. And said, okay,
there we go.
We're going to plant the seeds of the murder mystery a little sooner, even though they're not going to have time to deal with it right now because they're dealing with the Maria thing.
Yeah.
We're just going to plant that so that the reader knows, telegraphed, that's coming.
Now
they planted it very clearly and said this is the end of part 1.
Mm-hmm.
So they did have a good sense of it, but I would have just liked a little more telegraphing of
it would have been
where it's going.
It'd have been a smoother transition. I think in an earlier. I think in the last episode, I kind of referenced the early seasons of The Wire and how there's a huge tonal shift at the end, from season 1 to season 2. I'm not comparing Grass Kings to The Wire. Just for those listening out there,
look,
it's about the feel though, and so it's almost like what you're saying there is if it might have been an easier transition if a couple of the characters who showed up in season 2 of The Wire, not even named, just if they were like in the background, you saw someone take a meeting with the Greeks or something like that. If you got a sense of what that was,
they'd
there,
mentioned the shipping yard,
getting
something from there.
If it was just a line or two, 2 or 3 lines in an episode or 2 in the middle of the season, just so to plant the idea, so it's not a complete shift. You can be like, oh look, they planted that back in episode 3. So what you're saying there that. The idea of that taunt from Humbert, if that had come early on, then you would know we're eventually going towards murder mystery. That this serial killer is going to be bigger because
The Wire is a great comparison because what holds The Wire together, in a sense,
is the city, the setting.
Well, it's the city, the setting. McNulty ostensibly, even though there's few episodes without him in it. But to me, it's that Tom Waits song.
Way Down the Hole.
Way Down the Hole. And each season, it's covered by someone else.
A little different.
But it's the same song. And that's what these volumes feel like. It's like, it's just someone new picking up the same song and playing it. And I think that's actually a good
you're in the same world. We're dealing in the Grass Kingdom.
Way down in a hole.
Yeah, but we're looking at different aspects of it because it's not about being in the Grass Kingdom. It's about a facet of that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I think it's a kind of book that the average and even the
it's not
less
a good
than
entry point.
No, it's
comics.
not. But I think the average comic reader and even the less than average comic reader or the better than average comic reader probably would have missed and probably wouldn't have seen. So I guess real quick to wrap up that 9-panel page, I'm guessing is you calling that your
my
your
bookmark. And again, I was shopping on one of those comic art auction sites, and they've got a lot of Grass Kingdom pages still for sale, but none of them had particular meaning for me. I'm like, I would love to buy one and be like, our podcast covered this. I've got it hanging on my wall. If they had that 9-panel page or like the Welcome to the Grass Kingdom or You're Not Leaving the Grass Kingdom, that would be, that's my bookmark, and I would love to frame it on the wall.
That'd be great.
I could just rip the page out and frame it, I guess.
You could do that.
Brian K. Vaughan would endorse it.
Yeah, you know what? Books are meant to be read. My bookmark is going to be much, much, much less meaningful, but it's something that I absolutely love because it goes back to my child. I want to say it goes back to my childhood, but really it sticks with me now. In issue 13, when the feds attack the Grass Kingdom and everyone's kind of, they're trying to defend themselves. Shelley, the woman who runs the junkyard, she's in a VW bus, and then Allison, who is Pinball's mother, and she pops out of the top of the van like with a minigun, and they start firing back. And anytime a VW bus is turned into a tactical vehicle, I think of Back to the Future, and I think of the Libyans.
Yep.
And to this day now, I could be somewhere with my brother. My brother and I we're both in our early 40s right now. You can see a VW bus and just be like, the Libyans.
Yeah.
It used to be we'd shout it. to like mimic the
sure.
movie. Now you just point out and be like Libyans.
Yep.
And that's all the joke we need right there. So anytime so whenever I see a VW bus, I consider it a tactical vehicle thanks to Back to the Future, and I love seeing that right there. Although in the movie, I guess the guy jumps out of the top and he's got an RPG on his shoulder. Here Allison has a mounted minigun, but still, I love seeing that.
I watched that movie like 100 times as a kid.
Yeah.
And I have perfect recollection of it as you brought it up, but had not associated VW vans with that scene.
Oh, yeah.
Now I will.
Yeah.
But man, VW, all the free marketing they get, because anytime I see the old Bug, it's Herbie. Yep. When I was a kid, I watched the Herbie movies. So we identified Herbies on the road. I don't do that anymore.
Punch Bug, yeah. But no, yeah. So I'm going to assume, and
now that might be a page you could buy.
It very well could be. It very well could be. But I don't want to know otherwise. I'm going to assume that was absolutely meant to be a Back to the Future reference. I don't care if there are
why not? Yeah.
Contradicting that. That is what I'm sticking with. So that is my favorite moment from this Fauna volume.
Excellent. And with that, I think we're wrapping Grass Kings. Thank you for reading along with us. I can't imagine you would have listened to this long if you hadn't been reading along. So thank you for reading along with us. We hope you enjoyed it. Would love to hear your thoughts. I think it's probably a less popular title than Paper Girls. However, if we start to get comments on the show notes on the website or on the Facebook group or Twitter, whatever, I think we'd be happy to come back and do a mailbag episode on this.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, I'm sure it will just be a book that we continue to reference as we move through new episodes. So thank you for joining us. As always, you can find us at storiedarcs.com, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All of those can be linked from storiedarcs.com. And you can subscribe on your favorite podcast app. If your podcast app has reviews, go ahead and review us. Neither of us are Apple users. We can't even self-review for 5 stars on the iTunes store. So we'd appreciate any reviews you can give us. I believe Spotify does reviews.
I think so.
I haven't decided what I think of our show yet, so I've not reviewed it yet.
I'm on the fence as well.
Yeah, I would like to hear other people do so, only if it's 5 stars.
Yes.
Otherwise, just stop listening if you don't enjoy it. Anyway, thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Peace.